2020, spring of 2020. Anybody remember what happened spring of 2020? When COVID hit us and all the schools were shut down and all of our kids were now doing school from home, if you guys remember what that was like. And all I can remember is one day I'm doing some work and I look out into my backyard and suddenly I see my two oldest boys beginning to drag 2x4s out into the backyard. Then I see plywood, sheets of plywood coming. I see my tools being drug out there. And I walked outside, I said, aren't you guys supposed to be doing school? And they're like, yeah, but first we wanted to build this skate ramp. And I was like, you're gonna build a skate ramp? And they said, yeah. So the neighborhood over from us, they were doing new construction. And so they decided to go dumpster diving and started pulling all of their garbage into my backyard, which was great. And so finally they're getting this structure up. And I mean, it's rickety to, say it best, but they are building this ramp structure. And then they begin to jump from the structure into the trampoline. And my wife is standing at the window. She goes, I just don't know if they should be doing this. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is just incredible. I've just never been so proud. This is just amazing. And then, of course, the boys come over after a little while. They're like, Dad, is it okay if we drag the trampoline over and we jump off the roof onto the trampoline? And I said, as long as you don't tell your mother, yes. No, you cannot. No, you cannot, no. Sometimes Tara and I, even in our parenting, sometimes we have different boundaries. Maybe you've been there as parents. You've had different boundaries for your kids or different ideas of what they should be. But I think that we could all agree that when it comes to our kids or even our grandkids, that all of them need guardrails just like we do. All of them need guardrails just like we do. And that's what this series has been all about. It's about establishing guardrails in our life to protect us from what's on the other side of those guardrails. None of us have been driving on a road thinking, those guardrails are so beautiful. None of us have ever thought that, but they're there to actually protect our lives. And so today I want to talk about how do we set up guardrails for our kids? How do we begin to help them do that? And I think it's especially important because each new generation has new challenges, don't they? If I think back to my grandparents' generation, just 2 generations ago, their generation wasn't perfect, but two-parent families were assumed. Sexual predators were virtually unheard of. The big problems in school were skipping class or chewing gum. That was a real big no-no. And even when I grew up, my generation wasn't innocent, but internet pornography didn't even exist yet. ADD was just being diagnosed. And if you had mentioned the word sexting or gender identity to someone, they would have had no idea of what you were talking about. And so each new generation has challenges and hurdles to navigate. And in the middle of the chaos, it's easy to feel lost as a parent, not knowing where to spend your energy or how, or where to set up guardrails, how to protect your kids. And I think that's so important. And so today we're gonna help us all establish some guardrails in our families, guardrails with our kids. And if you don't have kids, maybe you'd take some good notes and pass them along to a family member who does say, hey, I heard a great talk today about guardrails for kids. I wanted to send you this link, something like that. But we wanna lean into this because the idea of guardrails is very important, and this is how we are defining it for this series. It's right on your notes here. Guardrail is a standard of behavior that becomes a matter of conscience. It's a standard of behavior that we create, and in today's talk, standards that we create for our kids that when they bump up against it, their conscience lights up. And they go, I'm bumping up against a guardrail here and I need to back away because there's danger on the other side if I don't. And our goal as parents is we want to help create boundaries for them that we pray will become a matter of conscience for them so they can back into the safety zone. And so I think this is really, really important for all parents to understand. This is your first fill-in, that while you are not responsible for your kids, you are responsible to your kids. You're not responsible for your kids, but you are responsible to your kids. And what does that mean? That means that you are not responsible for every decision they make. They have their own brain, they have their own mind, they have their own attitude. You cannot determine every second of their behavior. They have their own free will to make choices. However, as parents, we are very much responsible to them for guiding them and for influencing them. And one of our main jobs as parents is to help create boundaries for them to live in and to learn in. And here's a verse that you've maybe heard before, but it's a life guiding verse for me, Proverbs 23, one of my very favorite verses. It says this: above all else, above everything else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Everything you do flows from it. And I love this verse, but I want to think of it in terms of a parenting context. And if we're thinking of it as a parenting context, it would read this way: above all else, guard their heart, for everything they do flows from it. Everything they do flows from it. Eventually, what this means is that everything that goes in eventually will come out. Whatever goes in will eventually come out. And so we have an obligation as parents to guard their hearts. And so your next fill-in, good guardrails begin with paying attention to what is filling their heart. Good guardrails begin by paying attention to what is filling their heart. I mean, how foolish it would be of us to ignore what they're watching, to ignore what they're listening to ignore who they're hanging out with, to ignore what they're participating in. We must pay attention to this because it gives us the opportunity to teach them how to guard their heart, because they don't know how yet, just like you didn't know how yet. And for some of you, you had parents that helped guide you and shape you. You had parents that set up guardrails for you that helped you tremendously in your life. There's others of you that could get up and you could tell stories about how you had parents that didn't set up that for you. And you had to learn the hard way. You had to learn the hard way by making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And sometimes our life can be full of regrets that could have been avoided had there been guardrails in its place. And it's important because if it were up to our kids, how many guardrails would they set them for themselves? Like zero, right? I mean, my kids would never brush their teeth. They would never go to school. They would eat nothing but junk food and pizza rolls. I mean, they would only sleep upon collapsing. I mean, that would be it. So as your kids are growing up, you've got to help them learn of these things. And this is a great verse that explains our role as parents in this area. Proverbs 6:20-22. Here's what it says: my son, keep your father's commands and do not forsake your mother's teachings. And so, any teens in the room, any young people in the room, this is a verse to you. Do not forsake your father's commands and your mother's teachings. They're saying, listen, teenagers, if you were wise, you would pay close attention to what your parents are trying to teach you and what they're trying to help you learn. It continues, because when you walk, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will speak to you. And as parents, here's our instruction from Proverbs: to guide them, to watch over them, to speak to them, to speak into their lives. And when I read that verse, the one thing I think is, makes me tired. Makes me tired just thinking about it, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of engagement with your kids. And it's hard and it's tiring and at times it's overwhelming, but I promise the end result will be worth it. And every parent in this room is also smart enough to know what's on the other side of the guardrails if we don't do this. If we don't engage and we don't put in the work and we aren't guiding and we aren't speaking into and we aren't watching over. Because when kids are given too few boundaries in a home, a strange thing begins to happen. They choose what they want to do, when they want. Everything goes their way, and then they become extremely frustrated because they aren't finding themselves happy. And that's when those of us, parents, we throw up our hands in frustration. We're like, I don't know why they're so crabby. We're giving them whatever they want. We're letting them do whatever they want. And yet that is the problem. Guardrails are so important in your next fill-in because kids don't always want what they say they want. Don't miss that. Guardrails are so important because kids don't always want what they say they want. They don't know what is best for them. That's why God has entrusted them to you. When our kids were little, they never once said to us, Mom and Dad, I want a regular dinner time with my family and a routine around bedtime. If you guys could do that for me, that would be awesome. My kids never once said that. But we know they need it. I've never once had my kids say to me, Dad, I really need you to help me and teach me how to treat other people so that one day I will be successful in my relationships. My kids have never once said that to me. They've never said, Dad, we need you to show us, Mom, Dad, we need you to show us how to deal with temptation in life so that we know how to say no when danger is coming our way. I've never once had our kids say, we need you to show us how to put up boundaries so I don't struggle with porn the rest of my life. They've never once said that to us. Or how to navigate negative influences. And how do we do that with friendships? When we feel like there's a negative influence our way, how do we navigate that? They've never once said that. But yet we know that they need these things. And why it is so important for us to understand this next fill-in, that guardrails today will create healthy decision-making tomorrow. Guardrails today for our kids will create healthy decision-making tomorrow and throughout their life. But they need to know how to make healthy decisions. And they won't know how to make healthy decisions unless parents are putting up good guardrails and good boundaries in their lives. Because come on, we all know this. Our job as parents is not just to protect our kids. What is our goal? Our goal is to help prepare them. Prepare them for when they leave our house and they walk into the real world. It's so important to prepare them for real life because whether you want to realize it or not, real life is coming. And oftentimes they'll sink or they will swim. It reminded me of when we were in South Dakota. I think a couple weeks ago, I talked about our vacation trip we took in 2019 to South Dakota. It was an awesome family trip. And we were hiking in canyons that looked a lot like this throughout some of the parks and the areas. And this is actually quite a steep cliff. If you can see all the way back down to the bottom, this is what we were kind of walking around. And whenever we came up to one of the edges near a trail where there was a cliff, there was always a wooden fence and a big sign that said, here's the boundary. And it wasn't long before we weren't paying attention and our kids were on the other side of those boundaries. Here's another picture of them just kind of wandering and exploring on their own. And I think that's the boundary fence to the left that you can see there, that they are not supposed to be on that other side. And of course we see them on the other side and we're freaking out. No, you have to be on this side of the fence. You cannot be on the other. We're fine, nothing's gonna happen, it's just fine. And I promise you, it was like 10 minutes later that another group came up and there was an older gentleman who tripped right near the edge. And it was like slow motion on my mind. I thought he was going over the cliff, I kid you not. And luckily he caught himself and somebody else kind of helped catch him and they kind of kept walking. I just thought, oh my gosh. And then literally a month after we got home, we heard the report that somebody fell and died right where we were. And so it's actually dangerous to hike kind of in those areas. But those fences and those signs were there as a guardrail, as a boundary marker to say, it's okay for you to go this far, but you can't go any further. We can't go any further because it's not that we don't trust you. Sure, you might be a good climber and all of that, but we don't trust the terrain and we don't trust the loose rocks and we don't trust the loose dirt and we don't trust the animals that could run up and scare you. We don't know what could happen on the other side of this boundary. And so you are safe up until this point, but you can't go beyond this. And in the lives of our kids, it's the same way. Your next fill-in, we are the gatekeepers of our child's life. We're the gatekeepers. You're the gatekeeper of your home. You're the gatekeeper of your TV. You're the gatekeeper of your computers. You're the gatekeeper of their life. You decide what comes in and what doesn't. You decide what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. You are that guide that will influence them of what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. We are the gatekeepers of our own home and of our kids' lives. And why is this important to remember? 1 Peter 5:8. It says, be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, goes about like a roaming lion, seeking whom he may devour. The enemy does not want spiritual health for your kids. The enemy does not want emotional or relational or sexual health for your kids. In fact, the enemy is doing the opposite. The enemy is saying, where are the ones that are weak? I want to go after them. Where are those that don't have any boundaries? How can I get into their lives? How can I attack them? And oftentimes as parents, we can fall into this comparison game. Well, if that parent's allowing it, then maybe, we should allow it. Or if this is, if they're doing that, then they can. And well, my friend's doing so-and-so and my friend. And so we just told our kids early on, listen, we're not comparing you to anybody else. We're not comparing our family to anybody else. We're going to set boundaries for us because God has given us as parents to you. And whether you like it or not, you're stuck with us. And so sometimes parents just have to decide what their standard is going to be for their family and shut out all the noise of our culture and what other families are or are not doing. You see your next fill-in, we get to set the guardrails around them that will prepare them for the future. We are the ones that get to set the guardrails around them to prepare them for the future. And our goal and our thought has always been that if we are strict when they are young, we don't have to be as strict when they're older. If we are strict when they're young and we slowly loosen those reins, the older they get as their age meets that independence that they crave, but it doesn't work backwards. You cannot be loosey-goosey with your kids when they are very little and expect when they're teenagers that you're gonna pull in the reins. It does not work that way. And maybe you've experienced that yourself, or maybe you've heard of others where it did not work so well for them, or you've seen that happens in other people's lives. The goal is, no, we're gonna set boundaries when they're young, we're gonna be strict when they're young, we're gonna hold them to standards when they're young, and we're gonna teach them and model, and then as they get older, we're gonna slowly release those reins to prepare them for their future. And what happens when those boundaries are broken when they're young? Consequences with a capital C. We're not looking the other way. We're not saying, it's fine. We're not doing that. No. We're gonna hold them accountable for their actions. Just like I was held accountable just about 2 months ago. I was driving in our fine city of Champlin. And I had to pick up our kids at the school, and they had to get to dance, and then this and that, and it was just like one of those days. And traffic was a nightmare, so I'm just gonna cut through the back roads, and I'm cutting through, and then I get behind this one driver, and it's a 40, and he's going 20, and my blood pressure's rising, and I'm just, maybe you could relate, where the Lord's doing the greatest work in me is when I'm driving, okay? He's still doing a great work in my life. As I was so frustrated and finally got off onto one of these other side roads, and so, I'm going, and I thought the speed limit was 35 in honesty, and I was going about 40-ish, 40-ish. And all of a sudden, an unmarked car comes behind me, lights start up, and I've got kids in the car. I'm like, oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me. And he comes up to the window, he goes, you're going pretty quick through this road here, and he goes, did you realize it's only 30 miles an hour? I had you clocked at 42, and I said, no, I did not realize it was 30. Thought it was a little bit higher than that. And he goes, okay. He goes, normally, 40, 41, I kind of let it go, but 42 is where I draw the line. I said, you're a liar, and you say that to everybody, no matter how fast they're going, don't you? Use that line on them. I was like, oh, okay. So he took my license, brought me back a ticket, and my kids got a front row seat to dad getting consequences for his actions. Great thing for them to learn. And really, I did it on purpose so they would learn a lesson. That's really what I was doing. But they need to know that our actions have consequences, both good and bad. And one of the greatest things, and don't miss this, one of the greatest things that a child can learn early on and carry into adulthood is the ability to accept responsibility for their own actions. To accept responsibility for their own actions. And I gotta tell you, as parents, we've been very careful to side with the teacher and side with the coach and side with the authority in their life. 9 times out of 10, that is where we're siding. Even if the scales aren't fully balanced, we're honoring and respecting the authority in their life, because we know we are not doing them any favors by protecting them from natural consequences. We do them no favors. We need them to take responsibility for their actions at the age that they are, because when they leave our home, the consequences only get bigger. The authority only becomes greater in their life. And if they don't learn when they are young to respect the authority that God's put in their life, if they don't learn when they are young to accept the guardrails that have been put in their life, they will think that they can get away with anything for the rest of their life, and what they will soon discover is that is not the case. And now their authority is their boss, a police officer. You know, all the stakes raise in their life. And I know, I can hear some of you right now and you're saying, but Ryan, it just takes so much effort and it just takes so much work and I get so tired of trying, and I get it. There are days that we are so wiped out emotionally just trying to deal with them, right? It's so difficult some days. Have you ever heard of the phrase, pick your hard? Have you ever heard that? Pick your hard? Well, sometimes you have to decide between difficult and more difficult. When it comes to parenting, there really isn't an easy track. Difficult or more difficult, which is why this phrase has always stuck with me, and I try to share it with parents all the time, and it's this phrase right here, that it's easier to build a fence at the top of the hill than drive the ambulance at the bottom. And so you might be tired, and it might feel exhausting, and it might feel like a lot, but it is easier to build the fence at the top than drive the ambulance at the bottom. Proverbs 13:24 says this: those who love their children care enough to discipline them. Those who love their children, and I believe that all of us, even if you're watching online, every parent, you love your children. And Proverbs would describe it this way, that if you love them, you will discipline them when they need it. It's showing the most care for them. But remember that discipline isn't meant to break a child, it's meant to guide them. A reminder to go another direction. And I've seen families be way too loose, and I've seen families be way too strict. A balance of boundaries and freedom is key, that is age appropriate as they get older. It's so important. And so in the last few minutes that we have together, I want to give you some really practical guardrails to set up with your kids and for you to consider. And the reason I say consider is because this is not thus saith the Lord. This is not like right here, that this is what you're going to do. But this is some advice that my wife and I would give to you. We're still in the trenches. We're still raising 4 kids from 10 to 17. We're in the trenches with you. But these are principles that we've seen even as we were youth pastors, and hundreds of families that we've seen. We've seen these principles work time and time and time again. And so these are guardrails that I would ask you to consider. And so the first one is this, is to put rating limits on TV and video games. Put rating limits on TV and video games. Is it God honoring? Right, the show that they're watching, you may not always know that, and that's why these TV shows are rated different things. That's why movies are rated different things. And so you need to set passwords. And so even as our kids have always grown up, there's always been a password on our TVs. For anything TV 14 and above, it was always password protected. They have to ask permission. We have to look at, okay, is this appropriate for you? Right, for the apps, all the games, and it says you gotta be 12 plus, 18 plus to play these games. We just follow those to the T, because it's not just the game, it's the advertising that goes into the games when they're in between games. And so we've been very careful. You gotta set those rating limits on TVs and video games. Again, it's a guardrail that you're setting up for their life. Next, protect all phones and devices with a parent-controlled app. Protect all phones and devices with a parent-controlled app, no matter what their age. I want you for a moment to go back to your teenage years. Would you do that for me? I want you to be 13, 15, 16 in your mind. Go back there if you would for me. And let me ask you this question. If you as a teenager had unfettered access to today's internet, does this help you or hurt you? My guess is that if we were honest, we'd say it probably doesn't help us. It probably doesn't do us any favors. And yet there are many parents that hand their kid a phone with 0 restrictions, unlimited pornography, unlimited videos of injury and death, communication with unknown people who have unknown intentions, unfiltered influences of drugs, alcohol, sexual ideology, and more. You make the list. And we're expecting 12, 14, 16-year-olds to have the emotional health to navigate all of that. See, this is not just to guard their hearts. It's so important that we're creating these boundaries for them, but also what we're learning and why there needs to be app controlled around these things. What we're learning around brain development is astounding. And you may not know this, but the American Academy of Pediatrics says that children 0 to 2 years old should have 0 screen time. Not on a device, not on a TV, nothing. Because they're understanding what this is doing to the brain. They're saying that all elementary age kids, from that all the way up to middle school, should have less than 2 hours of all time combined. TV, device, iPad, phone, doesn't matter, less than 2 hours. And here's why the alarms are going off for all the doctors and the scientists that are studying these things. Because remember, this is the first generation that's being raised on phones and devices and all of these things. First generation. So we are, in essence, our kids are the guinea pigs. And what we're discovering is alarming. And the reason why the alarm bells are going off is that kids, elementary age, are using an average of 7.5 hours per day on entertainment devices. 4 times the suggested amount. Teens are using an average of 9 hours per day. 9 hours per day looking at a device. And the first question that comes to mind is, what are they feeding their minds and their hearts? Because above all else, guard their heart, for everything they do flows out of it. PET scans studies have shown that technology use of more than 5 hours per day for kids is impacting the frontal cortex, leading to poor executive functioning and impulse control. What does this lead to? In the last 15 years, ADHD up 72%, eating disorders up 100%, depression up 106%, anxiety up 134%. Above all else, guard their heart, for everything they do flows out of it. And what we have forgotten, that the number one things that kids need is connection. Human connection with us, with their friends, with family, with people in their life. But social media is robbing them of that. As adults, right? Sometimes even we have a hard time of maybe feeling excluded or seeing things on social media and we feel bad about ourselves and why didn't we get included in that, and all their life looks so perfect. And I mean, and our brains are fully developed and we're grown adults. Imagine how teens are processing all of this. And here's the other problem. Sorry, I'm just full of good news today. Here's the other problem, is that we are still a decade or more away of having enough research to realize the damage that is happening to our kids with unguarded access to the internet and social media. Again, this is the first generation that is having to be raised with this. And as parents, we're going, how do we even navigate this? It's so difficult. It's so difficult. And I've told you this before, the number one fight in our home is around screen time. The number one fight in our home is around their phones and devices. Number one fight. And for us, it is a hill worth dying on. We've just made the decision. We don't care what other parents are doing, and we don't care what your friends are doing or what they are allowed to do and how much time we don't care. Because God hasn't given those kids to us to parent. He's only given you to us. And at the end of the day, we get to answer to him for how we have raised you. So the very first phone that our kids got was a dumb phone. Have you seen these? They're called dumb phones. They look like a smartphone, but all they can do is like call and text and, listen to music or something. And they're called dumb phones. And so we gave them to our kids and they thought it was very dumb. But we didn't care. We didn't care. Next boundary. No computers, phones, or TVs in their bedroom. Why? Public viewing versus private viewing. So important. So our kids, they've got to plug in their phones. It goes in the bathroom at night. They don't get it in their room. They're not scrolling till hours, all of that stuff. And this public and private viewing is important because my guess is that if you're over 35 years old, the first time that you looked at pornography, you had to work pretty hard to find that pornography. In today's day and age, it's zero work. Zero effort. So, and the exposure to sexual things especially. Pornography, information they're not ready for. People intend to harm them. I'm telling you, that is why we are seeing such a rise in sexual activity and rise in sexual harm and sexual offenses. That's why we're seeing that, because we have people that have been addicted to it. It's so important, parents, that we set up guardrails. Next guardrail, give them a consistent bedtime and curfew. Give them a consistent bedtime and curfew. Routine helps them with a sense of security, and good sleep helps them learn, helps their brains develop, all of that. Next one, hold them accountable for how they talk and treat others. Hold them accountable for how they talk to and treat others. You get what you expect. If you expect little, you will get little. If you expect much, you will get much. I will not forget one of our kids, they were about 8 or 9 years old, and they were at a practice field. They were playing baseball, and a kid cut in line, and the coach didn't see it, and so, told our son to go to the back of the line, and he started arguing with his coach right there in practice and started giving it back to him. That is not happening. And so we pulled him aside, and we told him that the coach is the authority. Yeah, but doesn't matter. What he says goes right now. He's running the ship, not you. He's in charge. And the way you talk to him was actually disrespectful. And so before you continue this practice, you're going to walk over to him and you're going to apologize to him for being disrespectful to him. Well, you would have thought we asked him to cut off his right arm. Mosey's on out there, has a conversation with the coach. I'm sorry for being disrespectful. And what does the coach do? Like any good coach does. Puts his arm around and says, hey, no problem. Let's work together as a team, right? Suddenly his countenance. What you expect from your kids is what will follow them the rest of their life. What you allow right now will become the blueprint for how they treat other people later on in life. It's so important. Next, last guardrail, promote the right friendships. Promote the right friendships. Show me their friends, and I'll show you their future. The people they hang out with the most, they will become like whether you like it or not. Steer them towards the right friends. You say, Ryan, how do we steer them towards the right friends? You make it very easy for them to hang out with the right friends. You go out of your way to pick anybody up and drop anybody off, anything that we can do to have them hang out with the right friends, and we make it incredibly difficult for them to hang out with the wrong friends, the wrong influences. But see, these conversations, you start when they're young. Hey, does that person, did they make right choices? How do you feel about that? And if they're not making right choices and you're hanging out with them, do you think that's gonna make you make wrong choices too? Right? These are the kind of conversations because, again, they're processing these things in their mind and their heart for when they are older. 1 Corinthians 15:33 says this, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character every single time. And so, guardrails for you to consider. And none of this is easy, but I promise you it will be worth it. But there is one rule for all of it. And if I could give one rule to every parent, for all of your correcting, for all of your boundaries, for all of your parenting, for every bit of it, this is it, this is your last fill-in, that rules without relationship leads to rebellion. Rules without relationship leads to rebellion. You must establish relationship with them so they can see your heart. They know how much you love them. They know how much you care for them so that you have relational currency to set the guardrails in their life. You have the relational currency to say, no, you can't go hang out with them. You have the relational currency to say, I'm sorry, you can't be on your phone anymore. Relational currency to say you need to get back out on the field and apologize to your coach. Enough relational currency that it keeps your relationship good while you are doing the difficult things that is required of you as a parent. This is not for the faint of heart. And there are times that we've gotten it right, and there are times that we've gotten it wrong, times that we've made mistakes. Some parents are saving for college. We're saving for counseling one day. It's just a different approach. But none of us are perfect. There's no perfect parent. We're all doing our very best by God's grace. It's what we want. And whether or not they would ever say it, they really do want guardrails. They really do need guardrails. So would you mind closing your eyes and let's pray together? Father, I thank you so much that you love us so much and you love our kids so much, that you're giving us instruction on how to raise them and how to lead them and how to care for them, how to prepare them and protect them. God, we want to do all of these things right, and we just know, God, that there's no way we could do it all. But would you give us grace every day to do as much as we can, to invest as much and prepare as much and protect as much, because we know what's at stake. So give us wisdom, give us the right heart, give us the right temperaments, give us the right words. We need your help. And God, we pray in all the areas where we fall short, we ask that you would fill in the gaps. And every time they're at Tuesday nights and Wednesday nights, God, fill the gaps, mold and mend their hearts in youth group. God, as they're in kids' classes and hearing about you, would you fill in the gaps and mold and mend their hearts to follow you, to love you, to know you, and to make right decisions. So God, today, we know it's not easy, but would you give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we've heard today, and give us the courage to do it. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.